You ever watch a wildlife documentary where the narrator whispers dramatically about a baby gazelle trying to stand up, while a whole lion pride is jogging toward it? Yeah, that's the energy of today's list. Because in a world where Egypt rolls out tanks like it's Black Friday and Algeria flexes fighter jets like Pokemon cards, some African militaries are out here basically saying, "Look, we tried." Today, we're diving into the top 10 weakest militaries in Africa, a tour of underfunded uniforms, equipment shortages, and armies that would probably lose a fight with a determined mosquito. And trust me, every country on this list has a story. Some tragic, some chaotic, some that make you sit back and say, "Bruh, how is this the official army?" So if you're new here, grab a seat, tap subscribe, hit the bell, and prepare yourself. Because these rankings are based on firepower, resources, manpower, training, equipment, and real-world capability, not vibes, not patriotism, and definitely not wishful thinking. Let's kick off this list with number 10. And believe me, it only gets weaker from here. 10. South Sudan. The military held together with sheer willpower. South Sudan, the world's youngest country and unfortunately one of the continent's weakest defense forces. Imagine building an army during a civil war, then trying to reorganize it during another civil war, then patching it together during, another round of civil conflict. If chaos had a military, this would be it. On paper, South Sudan looks intimidating with nearly 200,000 personnel. But let's be honest, quantity does not equal quality. If that were true, ants would be the global superpower. The real issue? Fragmentation, poor training, zero cohesion, political turmoil. Their military is basically a giant WhatsApp group where everyone is technically in the army, but nobody is listening to the same commander. Years of internal conflict shredded the structure. Equipment is outdated, units operate independently, logistics are a nightmare, and corruption eats the budget faster than breakfast cereal. Their air force and navy exist in theory, but reality? Not so shiny. Firepower rankings consistently place South Sudan near the bottom, and it's not hard to see why. But if you think that was unorganized, wait till you meet number 9. An army that occupies an entire country and somehow still isn't fully in control. The sequel nobody asked for. 9. Republic of the Congo. Present everywhere, effective nowhere. Welcome to the Republic of the Congo, where the military somehow manages to be visible throughout the country. Yet barely in control of anything, it's like being at every meeting but still not knowing what the company actually does. Their army, air force, and marine units total around 10,000 personnel. That's not tiny. But the problem isn't size, it's professionalism, or the lack of it. Most analysts describe the Congolese military as unprofessional, poorly trained, and badly equipped. Imagine showing up to a basketball game wearing Crocs and hoping nobody notices. Yeah, that kind of energy. The country has faced decades of internal political division and rebel groups, which has basically turned the military into a confused hall monitor dealing with a school full of troublemakers. They're present, but presence isn't power. And even when they deploy across the country, being physically somewhere doesn't mean they're actually controlling it. Some units behave more like the armed groups they're supposed to be fighting. Definitely not a great Yelp review for any army. Their firepower ranking keeps them deep in the bottom tier of global militaries, and unless major reforms arrive, Congo's soldiers might remain more symbolic than strategic. If you thought an army that can't control its own territory was worrying, wait till you see number 8, where limited resources is a polite way of saying our navy has about as many ships as a bathtub. 8. Mauritania. Mauritania, a country so dominated by desert that even their navy is wondering what it's doing there. With around 16,000 active personnel and a military budget that barely scratches $50 million, Mauritania's armed forces operate on pure necessity. And you can feel it. Limited training, minimal equipment, and scarce resources define their defense landscape. It's like trying to run a marathon with flip-flops and a granola bar. You'll move, but it won't be pretty. Terrorist threats in the region stretch the country's capabilities even thinner. When you're constantly fighting extremists with outdated tech and underpaid troops, weakness becomes a structural problem, not a temporary setback. Their air force has few aircraft, their navy, even fewer ships, and their ground forces are functional, but limited. Mauritania isn't the absolute weakest on the continent, but compared to their neighbors, the gap shows. It's not for lack of effort, it's simply a lack of money, modernization, and resources. And if you think that's rough, just wait till you hear about number 7, a country that managed to spend over $100 million on its military and still ended up with almost nothing to show for it. 7. Madagascar. Madagascar, an island famous for lemurs, vanilla, and apparently one of the weakest militaries on the continent. With over 13,000 personnel and a military budget that crosses $100 million, you'd assume they'd have at least a half-decent force, right? Wrong. So wrong. Madagascar's military assets look like someone's shopping list after payday got cancelled. We're talking a handful of aircraft, barely any armored vehicles, 0 attack helicopters, 0 dedicated strike aircraft, and a navy with, well, let's just say if a pirate sneezed too aggressively, he might sink a third of their fleet. For an island nation with thousands of kilometers of coastline, Madagascar, having no submarines, no frigates, no corvettes, and no mine warfare vessels, is basically the naval version of leaving your front door wide open and hoping the breeze doesn't break in. Despite the budget being relatively high, corruption and mismanagement drain the funds long before they ever reach actual soldiers or equipment. It's like wiring money into a black hole. Madagascar's firepower rating consistently keeps them among the continent's weakest, and unless major reforms roll in, the island's military will remain more of a formality than a force. If that surprised you, get ready, because number 6 is a military so small and so young that it feels less like an army and more like a college group project wearing uniforms. 6. Namibia. Namibia's defense force was established in 1990, which makes it younger than 90% of the memes on the internet. It's composed of the Army, Navy, and Air Force, and a whole lot of questions. Here's the wild part. Most personnel are between 18 and 25 years old. Basically, it's an army full of teenagers and fresh 20-somethings who should be arguing about video game graphics, not running a national defense strategy with only 10,000 active personnel. Namibia's force is tiny, and soldiers typically serve for just 4 years before moving on, which means experience never gets the chance to age. It's the military version of a revolving door. Their equipment list is short, their modernization pace is slow, and their budget, around $115 million, is stretched thinner than the Wi-Fi signal in a basement. Namibia isn't the absolute bottom of the list, but they're nowhere near the middle either. It's a youthful, modestly funded, lightly equipped force that's simply not built for major conflict or large-scale operations. But as inexperienced as Namibia is, the next country is even more shocking, because it barely has a functioning army at all. Get ready for number 5, where the military is so fractured and under-equipped that calling it an army feels like a generous compliment. 5. Central African Republic. The Central African Republic's military is, well, calling it a military is already being generous. After the 2012 civil war, the armed forces basically evaporated like mist in the morning sun. What's left today is a patchwork of units that survive almost entirely on international support. Manpower, just about 7,100 personnel total, and that includes the Army, Gendarmerie, Air Services, and National Police. For a country of over 5 million people, this is the equivalent of trying to guard an entire mall with 3 security guards and one flashlight. Their equipment? Barely 60 usable assets total, across land, air, and whatever's left of their naval capacity. If you tried to list their military gear on a spreadsheet, it would fit on one screen without scrolling. The government has been trying to rebuild a unified force for years, but constant instability, rebel groups, and lack of resources keep pulling it apart like a cheap zipper. Some foreign trainers have tried turning the army into something functional. Outcome? Imagine teaching someone to drive in a car with no engine. The Central African Republic's military isn't just weak, it's dependent, fragmented, and chronically undersupplied. If danger came knocking, this force would be calling neighbors for help faster than you can say peacekeeping mission. But before you think it can't get weaker than this, meet number 4, a country where almost half the army seems to exist solely to protect one man. 4. Gabon. Gabon's military is one of the most unintentionally comedic forces on this list, not because they're silly, but because of how wildly lopsided their priorities are. The entire military consists of around 5,000 personnel, divided among the Army, Navy, Air Force, and National Gendarmerie. But here's the twist. About 1,800 of them, nearly 40%, are specifically trained and equipped to protect the president. Not the country, not the borders, not the seas, just the president. It's basically a high-budget VIP protection squad masquerading as a national defense force. Their overall equipment is limited, their training varies, and their modernization is slow. They have a military budget of roughly $80 million, but most of it funnels into elite presidential units while the rest of the force, well, survives. Gabon has one of the most unequal internal military structures in Africa. The President's Guard, top tier. The rest, about as intimidating as a stern librarian. But don't worry, number 3 makes this look like a luxury army. Because we're about to talk about a country that has so little equipment, its entire asset list looks shorter than a grocery receipt. 3. Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone's military isn't just small, it's shockingly small. Try to imagine a national defense force with only 8,500 active personnel and barely 30 total military assets across land, sea, and air combined. 30. Not 30 tanks, not 30 aircraft. 30. Everything. You could practically fit their entire equipment catalog on one PowerPoint slide. With space left over for the company logo, their defense budget sits at around $75 million, which sounds decent until you realize how far behind they are in terms of modernization. This force is still recovering from the brutal civil war of the 1990s and early 2000s, which wrecked infrastructure, weakened institutions, and drained national resources. The biggest issue? They simply don't have the tools or scale to defend themselves from any serious threat. The air wing is minimal, the Navy is barely afloat, and the Army relies heavily on international partners for training and equipment. They're trying, genuinely, but rebuilding from decades of destruction is like trying to assemble IKEA furniture without screws or instructions. If Sierra Leone feels underpowered, just wait. Because number 2 is a country where millions of dollars, years of foreign intervention, and endless reform attempts somehow still produced one of the weakest armies on the planet too. Somalia. Somalia's military has one of the most chaotic reputations in modern history, and unfortunately, not without reason. For decades, the country has battled insurgency, political division, corruption, and state collapse, which has torn the army apart in every direction. Today, the Somali military suffers from fragmented units, weak command structures, poor record-keeping, unreliable personnel tracking, and barely functional logistics. It's so disorganized that at one point, the government didn't even have a clear list of who was actually in the army. Imagine having a military where nobody knows who's supposed to show up. That's not a defense force, that's a surprise party. Despite foreign nations pouring equipment, training, and hundreds of millions of dollars into rebuilding Somalia's army, results have been painfully slow. They have roughly 20,000 active personnel, but capability is the issue. Their air force, practically non-existent, their navy, a shadow of its former self, their equipment, outdated, irregular, and often poorly maintained. Somalia's spot near the very bottom of global firepower rankings is no shock. It's the unfortunate outcome of decades of instability. They're improving, yes, but painfully slowly. And as low as Somalia ranks, there is one country that still edges them out for the title of weakest military in Africa. A nation whose defense force is so small, so unequipped, and so limited that it barely qualifies as an army at all. Get ready, because number one is the definition of we're doing our best with what we've got. 1. Liberia. And at the very bottom of the list, the weakest military in Africa, we have Liberia. Liberia's armed forces are so small, so lightly equipped, and so limited that calling it a military might actually be overselling it. We're talking about a defense force with just 2,100 active personnel. That's not an army, that's a high school gymnasium during graduation. Here's the wildest part. Liberia essentially has one functional branch, the land force. Their so-called Coast Guard is tiny, under-equipped, and barely operational. They have no significant air power, no armored divisions, no real naval force, and almost no heavy equipment of any kind. Years of civil war wrecked the country's defense infrastructure. International assistance, especially from the US, helped rebuild basic structures, but not enough to turn Liberia into a modern fighting force. Training improved, organization improved, discipline improved, but equipment, not so much. Their annual defense budget hovers around $13 million, which is small enough that buying a single fighter jet would wipe out the entire thing. So Liberia focuses mostly on internal security, peacekeeping training, and maintaining stability, not external threats. In global rankings, Liberia regularly sits at the very bottom, and with no aircraft, no heavy armor, and no sizable navy, they're simply outmatched by almost any modern force on the continent. But here's the thing. Weak doesn't mean worthless. These countries face economic instability, political crisis, insurgency, and historic challenges that shaped their militaries into what they are today. Their weaknesses aren't the result of laziness, but of circumstance, conflict, and limited resources. Still, in a list of firepower, capability, and combat readiness, Liberia takes the bottom spot without a fight. And there you have it, the top 10 weakest militaries in Africa. A countdown that shows how history, economics, politics, and geography can shape a country's strength or expose its vulnerabilities. If you enjoyed this breakdown, learned something new, or just want more bold, witty deep dives into Africa's geopolitical landscape, make sure you hit subscribe, tap the notification bell, drop a comment with the country you were most surprised by, and share this video with someone who thinks all militaries are created equal. Because trust me, they're not. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.